Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and we have back with us our favorite guest, Mr. Leighton Grey. How are you?
Oh, what a distinction to be the favorite guest. Thank you. I'll take it.
You've been back. You've been on four times. Anytime I'm
Wow.
waiting for you to deny the invitation, be like, no, I've had enough.
Number five's the charm.
We'll
I'll,
see.
I'll,
We'll
I'll
see.
try and get it right this time, Payment.
I'm expecting good jokes from you this time. So, Leighton, let's just jump right into it. Today's topic. I want to start with Bill C70. Can you please give us a breakdown? Take as much time as you want. What is Bill C70?
Bill C70 is a bill that was introduced in May by the Liberal government. And like many of the other laws that this government has tried to enact, it's really aimed at changing the face of the Canadian Constitution through means other than amending the Constitution. And so we've had a series of these bills. We talked previously about Bill C63, which is the Online Harms Act. We talked about Bill 367, which would remove an exemption for, speaking about or quoting scripture in support of certain religious beliefs. Right now, Bill C50 is in the Senate and right now, and it would essentially it would justify the federal government wiping out the oil and gas industry in its zeal to impose net zero. But Bill C70 is another in this sort of panoply, this landscape of laws, which I really see as evidence, clear evidence that the Canadian government, the people we have in power right now, many of whom are foreign nationals, which is nothing wrong with being a foreign national, except you're not they're working for foreign interests and not Canada. And what's being implemented here is really an agenda that doesn't serve Canadians. On the surface, and this is typical of all of these bills, Bill C70 would ostensibly serve an important public interest. That would be to detect and to just sort of mete out to help us decipher and discern people who are actually being influenced by foreign governments and are working against Canadians through their being in a position of public confidence, public officials, people like MPs and MLAs. And so the ostensible goal of the bill is to help Parliament and help lawmakers or to discover these people. The ironic thing is that it comes at a time when we know that there's more foreign interference or more evident foreign interference in Canadian government than ever before, particularly at the federal level. There's clear evidence that the 2019 and 2021 federal elections were interfered with by the Chinese. We now have evidence that there's been interference from India. And there are right now a dozen people whose identities are supposedly unknown, but we have a pretty good idea who they are, who are clearly have been influenced by foreign governments, people who are high ranking in the Liberal Party, in the Liberal government. And of course, the federal government is in full attack mode. They won't even reveal the names of these people for reasons, I guess, because us silly Canadians don't have the right to know whether or not our elected officials are corrupt. But the irony is, Bill C70 is aimed at dealing with the very thing that the Liberals are doing right now, which is kind of typical of what this government and governments like it do. The scariest thing about Bill C70 is, again, like many of the bills that I mentioned earlier, what they actually do is different than what they're ostensibly intended to do. And Bill C70, I would describe as an omnibus bill. It's sneaking in a lot of things sort of under our notice that would be very dangerous. For example, I read the fine print of Bill C70 as essentially making the Freedom Convoy, the truckers' convoy, an illegal gathering. And again, this clearly violates, the charter, the freedom of association, freedom of ability to gather and to protest, which are constitutionally guaranteed and have been guaranteed from time immemorial in our system. But Bill C70 is aimed at changing things like that and restricting more and more the freedoms, the rights and freedoms and civil liberties that Canadians have come to know and enjoy. And in fact, that we had been known around the world for in our country until just a few years ago.
Leighton, can you explain what an omnibus bill is?
An omnibus bill is, it used to be the way laws were made. We should go back to a useful definition of what law is. And the best one I can find is actually from Thomas Aquinas. This goes all the way back to the Summa Theologica. Those who don't know who Aquinas was, I would urge you to Google and check out his amazing life. He was one of the most brilliant and inspired intellects ever in history. But he wrote something called the Summa Theologica, which basically set out the concept of natural law and took it sort of from the history of Moses, from the Bible, and translated into how it could actually put into effect in real terms, or perhaps in lay terms. But he said that, and I just got the quote here, so I have it exact. He says, law is an ordination of reason, so it has to be rational, it has to be logical, by the proper authority. In Canada, people who we elect as opposed to the administrative state, for the common good, that is, for the good of Canadians, and promulgated. Promulgated meaning we have to know what the law is. It's trite to say that ignorance of the law is no defense, but there's a corresponding duty on our legislatures, the people making law, to make sure we know what the law is. So coming back to these omnibus bills, they really are a affront to every aspect of what Aquinas said. Because in a lot of ways they are irrational, they're illogical, and they're certainly not serving the needs and the goods of Canadians. These are not laws that we want. Clearly, there's a serious question about proper authority. When we use the term omnibus bill, what we're really seeing is rather than think of something like like a city ordinance against stray dogs. That's an exercise by the proper authority, and it's pointed at a specific situation that and that's something that law is intended to do, to protect the public, and to for that matter to protect animals, and to keep the public peace. But these omnibus bills, they're aimed at essentially allowing the administrative state, bureaucrats, to actually write these bills. And unfortunately, in case people don't realize this, politicians really are for the most part pretty lazy, and they're quite content to have government bureaucrats do all of their work. And unfortunately, these bureaucrats are the true ideologues. They are the ones who are actually most interested in achieving particular goals that go against the interests of Canadians. So in an omnibus bill, what we have is a situation where you have a massive bill, which here is ostensibly supposed to deal with, spying on government and foreign interference, but actually deals with the whole panoply of other things. And principally with the Liberals, every one of these omnibus bills almost always includes, number one, a restriction of liberty of other Canadians. Number two, some sort of spending that they want to do, either to give money to their friends, or to spend money on things that really are not improving the lives of Canadians. And then thirdly, expanding government. And that's really what these omnibus bills are designed to do. And their origin goes back to FDR and the New Deal in the 1930s, where he was essentially came in and was trying to legislate in the United States out of the Depression. And we had similar legislation come into effect in Canada. And this is how we sort of got onto this, this debt spending, Keynesian economics theory that isn't going very well for us right now. But these omnibus bills, essentially what they do is they expand the power of government, but they do it in sort of a sneaky way. And these bills are huge. They're tens of thousands of pages sometimes. And then within them, you have regulations, and the devil's in the details. Oftentimes, it's not the bill, it's the regulations that make the biggest difference. And what the bill does is it grants to bureaucrats the ability to go and write those regulations, to actually write the law the way they want to write it. And again, this comes back to what Aquinas said. Well, how could that be promulgated? How can you and I, as Canadians, know what that law is when our legislatures, with the proper authority, according to Aquinas, are not even writing that law, really, nor are they communicating the essence of it to us. So these omnibus bills are very, very dangerous, but they are the thing of the age for governments right now, for leftist governments like what we see in Canada and in the United States, and for that matter, what has been happening in countries like Germany and France, where we just recently saw a complete rejection of this. So the EU is also very much involved in this. I'll give you one example. Hungary, and many people have strong opinions about Mr. Orban and his government, but they present themselves as a sort of a Christian theocracy, and they will not take money from the EU because the strings attached to the EU or that money are that they have to promote the LGBTQ agenda, which goes against the whole essence of Hungary, what their government supports, and also that they'd have to accept migrants. And so Hungary is looking at what's happened in countries like France and Germany and Belgium and elsewhere, and they're saying, no, thank you. But that's an example of omnibus legislation, where the EU has passed a spending bill that would give money to certain members of the EU, but attached to it are these strings, and the devil's in the details. If you take the money, then you have to abide by all these other rules that the administrative state is imposing. So that's kind of Cole's notes of what omnibus bills are and why governments like them so much.
And that was pretty epic. We went from legislation to history to geopolitics. I'm
tying it all together.
Yeah.
That's why I have to keep coming back, because I open up these boxes and then I have to fill them.
You're making me look bad, Leighton. What about? I tried to read the bill. I wanted to ask you about this. It's incomprehensible. Like I just couldn't do it. Do you guys have a term for this in law? Like it's just jargon.
This is part of and again, I come back to Aquinas' definition about promulgated. You're a very smart guy. You're very well educated. You read and understand and comprehend things better than the vast majority of the population. Now, not to blow you up here, but I'm on your show, so I have to pump your tires a little bit. But let's face it, you're a very educated man. What about people who aren't as well read as you? They're expected to know what the law is. Ignorance of the law is no defense. This is a fundamental principle of law. How the heck are people going to know what the law is when they can't even read and understand it? And of course, this is by design. And it's not unique to law. Law has its own lexicon, its own language. But look at what happens with pharmaceuticals. Look at what doctors do. Look at what journalists are doing. Look at what the woke are doing, creating this new language. Like, what is cisgender? What is Islamophobia? I mean, people might have a specific, or what's queer theory? We're expected to know all these things. In fact, they're being legislated, and we're expected to know them under threat of being convicted of legal blasphemy. And yet nobody really understands what these are. And of course, this is something that is very much in the rocks. It's essential to postmodern theory. You probably know this, but when you take postmodernism back to people like Foucault, what they were is essentially frustrated artists, and they were very envious of people who were hard scientists. They wanted to be respected the way rocket scientists, for example, were, the people who put people on the moon and into outer space. And so they use this language that is very I would say it's word salad. Listen to Justin Trudeau; he speaks this naturally. This is the language. He says a whole bunch of words and he says nothing. But if you go read the text of people like Foucault, you use the correct word. It is incomprehensible, and it's meant to be. But the reason why they do it is because they want to make it so hard to understand for two reasons. Number one, so we won't know what it is, and secondly, so that we will think that we are stupid and that they are intelligent. When in fact, if you read the work of the best people in any language who write effectively, they have the ability to communicate in a way that we can clearly understand, and that isn't alien to us. And this is all. If you think of any of our great novelists or great poets, even our best music, right? Language is a means of communication. That's what it's there for. And but unfortunately, when the leftists and the postmodernists get a hold of it, it's another means of oppression. It's a means of stupefying people, making us think that, I'll just leave this to the experts. They're obviously much smarter than me. They know what this means. And you know what? I'll just trust them. Well, where has that gotten us, Payman?
In a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh.
But it's all by design. It's all by design. And, um, what I would like to see is more people question this like you are. Go and read these bills and just question, say, what is this? I mean, this is a law that's going to govern me. It's very serious, obviously. It imposes penalties. It affects me. It restricts my liberty. I can't understand this language. And if more people went and looked at these laws, I think, we'd have the beginnings of a civil uprising in this country that I think is sorely needed.
Let's hope so. Leighton, I'm just going to read a quote from a post you made on X.
Sure.
Omnibus mega bills are the legislative fad of the age. They are drawing a page from the Democrats in the U.S. who disguise social re-engineering inside massive public spending bills.
Mm-hmm.
The devil is in the details and currently running the administrative state in Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to that, please?
Yeah. So first of all, I have to give credit. I'm borrowing this idea from someone whose work I admire very much, this Dr. Thomas Sowell, who's written about this extensively in the United States. And he's a 94-year-old man. He's probably, in my opinion, he's the greatest living public intellectual, although he's a complete recluse. It's very hard to see him. But there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube. And I encourage your viewers and listeners to check out anything by Dr. Thomas Sowell, any of his brilliant books. And there's a lot of great stuff. There's a whole catalog of his interviews on YouTube. And he is the perfect example of a highly intelligent, very erudite man who speaks in a way that the common person can understand. And to me, that's the sign of a high intellect and of great brilliance. But he talks about this in the context of, in the 1960s, when you think of when Lyndon Johnson came to power after the Kennedy assassination in about 1963, 1964, the Democrats got this idea that they were going to construct something called the Great Society. And essentially what it was is, ostensibly it was a civil rights bill. It was to give legislative effect to the movement that had been started by people like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and others. But the truth of it is, they wanted to create a welfare state. They wanted to make the Black people and the poorest people in the United States heavily dependent upon government. They wanted to expand the size of government, which they did. They wanted to have the ability to pass bills that would give them money to wage wars, proxy wars, like they did in Vietnam. And so what they did is they created this concept, or they expanded the concept that I talked about that FDR really coined back in the 1930s, but they expanded it. So that they expanded the size of government and expanded something we call the administrative state that we've talked about here. And these are the people who are actually working the machinery of government. And if you want to see the greatest proof of this, take a look at Joe Biden today. The people who are the spokespeople for Joe Biden actually have to go in front of the press and in front of you and me and the world and say that the videos that we are seeing of Joe Biden, where the poor man is doddering around, obviously is not oriented, he's not compos mentis. They're actually at the point now where when we see a video of Barack Obama leading Joe Biden off the stage by the hand at a recent event, we're told that these are deep fakes, that AI is creating all this, and the White House is putting this out. So that if you want to understand how much the administrative state is running government, take a look at Joe Biden, and understand that you could have a doddering octogenarian, not even compos mentis, at the head of your state, and the state just keeps going. It keeps ticking like a clock, or a time bomb, as it were. Hopefully, that's not the latter. But what these omnibus bills do, and this concept of legislation, is very, very popular to the left for the reasons I've said, because it allows them to expand the state, their power, the size of government. It gives them, and the key thing they're interested in is the ability to spend a lot of money, your money and my money, and it keeps everything going. And of course, the problem with that is, and here again, I'm quoting Thomas Sowell: whenever government is big, the individual is small, and vice versa. So as we have seen governments expand, we've lived this out now in the Trudeau era. As the government has expanded, we've become less and less free, and we've become less and less wealthy. We've become less and less secure in our lives, and our futures seem more and more bleak. This is what government does. It chokes everything. Whereas when government is small, there's more individual responsibility, but also more individual freedom, more hope for the future, because we have this sense that we can be self-determining, that we can run our own families, we can run our own businesses, that we can work together in our communities, in our churches, and that we have a say in government, and that what we say is making a difference, and that the people we elect to government are actually governing in our best interests because they're answerable to us. Right now, through these omnibus bills, there's been a great transference of power to the administrative state, and those people are not answerable to us, and they know it, and that's the problem.
Leighton, I have a second quote for you. You may have answered this, so if you just want to comment on it. The Democrats have been doing the omnibus bills, since the 1960s, but the emergency COVID relief bills brought this genre of legislation to a whole new level.
Definitely. I mean, I read a very interesting piece not so long ago that talked about secondhand smoke. And I'll just share this with your viewers. It's been shown through comprehensive study that took over 3 decades in Great Britain, the whole concept of secondhand smoke being harmful to people who don't smoke is a complete hoax. And what's very interesting about it is we've seen from the time when I was a kid, when, people would smoke in the car. And I mean, I used to run to the store and get cigarettes from my dad. And I was like 9, 10 years old. I used to ride my bicycle to the store. Of course, now smokers are like criminals. You can't smoke anywhere. You can't smoke on a plane, a train, an automobile. People have to go outside and huddle in 30, 40 below weather to have a cigarette. They've been completely vilified and ostracized from society. And the paper I wrote it posited the theory that was sort of a dry run for COVID. What happened with COVID? Because the idea was, well, if you could segregate almost half of society, which was what smokers were, going back to the 1970s, what could that mean? What could you do with that? And of course, the whole thing was a psyop. Well, with COVID, we saw what happened now. That governments now, again, it was a psyop. We're seeing this play out. The best evidence of this, folks, is listening to Dr. Fauci, who now he's answering questions in Congress, and he's admitting that really there was no evidence whatsoever, and they knew that there was no evidence that the vaccines were effective at reducing transmission or spread. They knew that the whole thing of 6 foot social distancing was completely made up. And so what we're seeing it now, and I think this is going to become more and more clear, and part of the function of these bills is to suppress this so that we don't find out about it, is that the whole COVID thing, the whole COVID experiment was really a test of what could the government get away with. And to this point, apart from places like Alberta, where, the premier and the chief medical officer of health are both, drummed out of office, throughout most of the Western world, it looks as though governments have gotten away with it. That's starting. I think that the toll is starting to, the bell is starting to toll in Europe for some of those governments. I think what we're seeing in the recent elections is a delayed reaction. But what we're seeing now, and I don't think that that these people calculated this, we're seeing the delayed reaction of populism. I often say that Newton's laws of motion also apply to human affairs. And one of them is, as you know, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And the reaction to what these people did during COVID may not be equal. It may exceed that. And so this is going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Because I think in as much as the COVID era saw this great expansion of the power of government, even to the point of justifying violation of our most fundamental freedoms, like freedom of religion and freedom of expression. In as much as that was successful in the moment at the time, I think in the end, that is going to be the undoing of some of these governments. And I think we're going to see a populist movement swinging the other way, where, I think many of these people, like Dr. Fauci, are going to be held to account. And I think that we're entering an era where many people, not all of us, but many of us are going to be much more questioning of government, questioning of experts, less inclined to trust what they're telling us. One example that's going on right now in Alberta is Mayor Gondek, who's clearly a leftist by any definition, has declared a water emergency there because of some pipeline break. Well, first of all, she's in basically the epicenter of pipeline construction in all of Canada and perhaps the world. That's one problem. Secondly, she's going on TV and she's giving press conferences telling people how bad it is. And of course, to quote Milton Friedman, who said that the most permanent thing is a temporary government program. Now the temporary emergency that she's declared, now she wants to make permanent. Then you flip to the World Economic Forum policy page and you find out that water emergencies is one of their fundamental tenets for imposing their new world order. Well, they haven't produced an iota of evidence to Calgarians about whether or not a water emergency actually exists. And most of the people that I talk to in Calgary are simply ignoring her. They're using water as they always have before. There was a story that came out yesterday, and I believe this is a leftist plant story, about some people reporting on their neighbors about their using too much water. And I think that story is coming forth because people are not listening, and they're trying to frighten them into compliance the same way they did with COVID. And so that's encouraging to me. I don't like the idea that the mayor of Calgary has declared a fake water emergency, and I think it is a hoax. I don't like the fact that that the Smith government has come in and rubber stamped that and trusted them and taken them at their word. But I do like to see the fact that people in Calgary are now questioning it, and they're saying, show me the money, show me your cards, show me evidence. I don't believe you. You say there's a water emergency, but the water's still coming from my tap. I don't believe you. And most, my sense is most Calgarians are sort of taking this show me state attitude, which is wonderful. I think this is the way we need to be. It's sad in a sense because, it is dangerous that we don't trust our public officials to be honest with us, because, of course, there could be a very serious public emergency, and then we might get information from them that is true, and then we wouldn't act upon it, and that could cause great destruction. That's a dangerous thing. But at the same time, in this particular moment in the Canadian polity, I think that, it's like a bumper sticker that used to be out when I was a kid that just said, question everything. I think that's maybe the best advice I can give people. And even things that I say or you say, I think people should question it. And when I talk about Thomas Aquinas, don't take my word for it. Go look it up. I mean, we've got this Google thing. I mean, it's the greatest depository of information in the history of human experience. Go and check it out. Don't take my word for it. And that's what I would say about anything people are hearing from their public officials. We can't take them at their word anymore, whether it's Bill C70 or anything else they're telling us. And that might be the greatest blessing coming out of COVID, is that we now are more questioning populace, or we should be. Some of us, of course, sadly, are going to be more inclined to comply because of the conditioning that's been imposed. People like Jason Christoff talk about this, and of course, we see people in the Starbucks wearing masks, and I feel sorry for them, because again, there's so much information out there that the masks don't work. But I think the vast majority of people that I talk to are questioning these narratives, are questioning these things that governments tell us. And in my mind, that's all to the good.
I'll just add one thing, Leighton. I remember in the 90s, I was a kid, and when we had, water shortages, the city would say, odd numbered houses on odd days, even number on even days for watering the lawn. And as a point of pride, my parents would say, like, oh, don't use that today. But that trust is gone. Like
Yeah,
nobody trusts anyone anymore.
yeah, yeah. It's sad, but it's necessary. I think that we are going to reach a point when trust improves, but our public officials are going to have to earn that trust. That's the era that we're entering. We're going to be much more questioning of our public officials, and of the information that we get. Some of the media giants are suffering the impact of this too. You see what happened with Global recently, where they had hundreds of employees have been laid off. People are turning off. They just they don't look to sources like Global anymore, for news and information, because they don't trust what they were telling us. And of course, ratings during COVID on CTV and Global, I don't think they were ever higher.
I'll, I'll say something else on that. Maybe this will be inappropriate for me to say, but for Google nowadays, I find like if you want to Google like it hurts when I pee, it's fine. But
Yeah.
besides that, I find you cannot use Google for anything reliable. Like
Oh yeah.
news
Yeah.
stories. The top
Yeah.
20 news stories are leftist news stories, and I go to X or Telegram now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those of your viewers and listeners who are familiar with PragerU, it's a tremendous resource. They were actually deplatformed by Google simply because they took a pro-Israel stance in the Gaza conflict that's going on over there. So that gives you an idea of how very much Google is left-leaning. And of course, that's another thing we could talk about on another day. Is in none of these omnibus bills, the United States have they done anything to curtail the impact and the scope of authority, unlegislated authority, that social media companies and search engines like Google have over the public square. And this is a big reason why Google cannot get into China, because of course the Chinese know that the impact that Google would have there. I think I don't know what it's called, but China has their own Google equivalent. But the social media in China is strictly controlled. I don't think that would be a good thing, but I think that some recognition, legislative recognition of the fact that social media companies like Google and Facebook and others are actually publishers, that they're not part of a sort of a public square. I think is necessary, and I think it's forthcoming. In fact, I believe it's part of Project 2025, which is part of the Republican, let's call it launching pad, for when Mr. Trump retakes the White House, is going to deal with that, and so that we do not have social media companies or massive search engines like Google basically being weaponized by governments and being used as instruments of censorship or suppression of information to the public.
That's actually a good segue to my next question. Um, I have a friend asked me to ask this question. He's a journalist, and he said that he looked at the Obama administration, and he saw that he passed laws that he knew were going to get struck down in the courts, but he did them anyway because he could get away with it.
Mm-hmm.
Fast
Mm-hmm.
forward to the Trump administration, sort of the opposite happened. The left was challenging law that was coming out of the Trump administration, knowing that they would fail in court, but they did it anyway. So his
Mm-hmm.
point is whether these this lawfare is against legal or illegal, they don't care as long as they're fighting it in the courts. Can you speak to that?
Well, it's a great question, first of all, and it strikes at another issue that you and I have talked about in our previous conversations, and that is the concept of legal activism. People like Barack Obama, who's a leftist, they see the courts as not independent, not as fair, impartial, independent tribunals or decision makers. They see the courts as extensions of the administrative state. And this is why they talk about things like stacking the court. And that's a different concept of legal decision making than conservatives have. So they do not. First of all, for that reason, Democrats or liberals in our country are very interested in getting their people appointed into the courts, That's very important to them, and they have been doing that. Um, and secondly, they do not fear the courts. In fact, recently, um, Joe Biden, one example of this in the United States, Joe Biden was essentially, well, on one view of the matter, is Obama 2.0. Um, he was asked about these remission of student loans. Well, the Supreme Court of the United States has already ruled that this is illegal and that the President of the United States has no authority to forgive these loans. And he publicly stated, I'm not sure that he knew he was stating this, but the teleprompter told him to say that he didn't care what the Supreme Court of the United States said. He was doing it anyway. And they are doing it anyway, and they're doing it even though it's illegal. Of course, this is a serious problem because if you understand anything about the United States Constitution, there's a separation of powers doctrine. And the courts are to be a check upon the executive and the legislative branches. And that is, when they exceed their constitutional authority, the courts are supposed to be there to say, "Hey, stop it! You're going offline here." When you have people in government who see power, the executive power of the state, as being supreme, which clearly the Democrats in the United States and the Liberals in Canada do, then what you have is you have a subversion of the rule of law, the idea that we're all subject to the law and that we're equal before the law. And you see this unfolding in Canada too. Take, for example, Bill C69. This is the Build No More Pipelines bill. Recently, that bill was ruled unconstitutional because it was ruled by the Federal Court of Appeal that the Liberal government had wandered into an area of jurisdiction that's exclusive to provinces. And of course, in Canada, people need to understand we don't have a national government. We're a confederation of provinces and a federal government that jurisdictionally, constitutionally, are equal in power within certain defined areas of jurisdiction. Well, in the No Pipelines case, Bill C69, it was clear to the court that the federal government was ruling in the area of natural resources. They were offside. That bill was ruled unconstitutional. Well, flash forward to today. First of all, they're appealing that decision, although it hasn't made its way into the courts yet. It's not clear whether the Supreme Court of Canada is even going to hear that case. But I told you about Bill C50, which is in the Senate right now. And really, it's just taking Bill C69 to a further degree. It says not only can you not transport this oil, you can't even produce it. And so Bill C50 is more offensive of provincial jurisdiction than Bill C69 was. 69 was ruled unconstitutional. So right here in Canada, we have another example of what your friend is talking about, quite rightly, and that is the Liberal government is trying to expand the power of government, really trying to rewrite the Constitution in a way that makes the federal government supreme and the provinces subservient. And the fact that they do not regard or respect the decisions of our courts. Another example would be the Mosley decision, which said that the Trudeau government to break up the Freedom Convoy and freezing bank accounts and so on, that was illegal. Our government is not respecting that either. Those laws are still on the books. And in fact, they say that they're appealing that decision. So I think, unfortunately, what your friend is talking about is symptomatic of these leftist governments that don't have any regard for the courts. They see themselves as supreme. And in fact, ultimately, their goal is to prevent any further elections and to remove all individual freedom so that they will just have power ad infinitum, on and on and on. So we won't even have free elections anymore. I think that Justin Trudeau's deepest dream is to have the situation that Vladimir Putin has in Russia, where you have an ostensible democratic state, where he has overwhelming popularity. They have elections, but the elections are simply shams.
I get the feeling that this isn't just a case of the Liberals being excited and kind of taking these cases to court. This is turning into a battleground, isn't it? Like the weaponization of the legal system. This is above and beyond. Or am I right or wrong?
Oh, I think it's this is exactly right. We have a very complex formula for amending the Constitution, and this was by design of these wise men like Brian Peckford and Premier Lougheed and others back in 1981 when they were sitting down and fashioning the new Constitution. But what the Liberals have decided to do is to remake the Canadian state, and effectively reconstitute it into a dictatorship where all the power operates out of Ottawa, and the way that they're doing it is through law. But what it is it's rule by law. It's not the rule of law. It's rule by law. And what they're doing is they're basically saying that the law is whatever they say it is because they have the power. And this is a theory of legal philosophy called positivism, which is that the law is the command of the sovereign. But of course, that runs headlong into the definition I gave you about Aquinas, which means that laws have to conform with reason. It has to be done according to proper authority, which means proper exercise of authority within limits. And they have to be for the common good, and these laws have to be communicated to the people who are governed by them in a way that they can understand and that accords with their own reason. And the concept of reason, to extend what Aquinas said, was, we're made in the image of God. And our reason is a gift from God. And what it means to have the power of reason, which only humans have, and because we're made in the image of God, what Aquinas would say is that we are given a quality of God, right? The reason why we can understand things like laws is because through reason, we're given a glimpse of the mind of God. It's a way for him to communicate with us. And of course, all of us have this, or should have this sense of when we're doing right or wrong. We have this innate sense. We call it common sense. But really what that means is that's when we're applying our reason, our rational faculties in a way where we understand what's going on. And that's a piece of what God has put in us, so that our laws, by extension, are to comply with God's laws. And that's simply not happening right now in the administrative state. And of course, it's no accident that where we have laws like the ones that are being passed in places like Canada, the United States right now, we have the absence of God, and indeed we have atheism, where God has been driven from the square entirely. And to me, that's the root of the problem. We need to get back to making laws according to reason, according to what people like Aquinas, the wise ancients, told us about how to make laws. That's what we have to get back to in this country and in the Western world, because fundamentally that is what made the West different. And the people who are coming here from countries like Iran, this is why they came here. I suspect is because they wanted to live in a place that was governed in a way where the laws were made according to reason, and not just were the blind command of the sovereign. And so we have a duty, actually, I think, to people who are coming to this country and who are coming to the West. We have a duty to preserve the West, and to preserve what it stands for, because otherwise we're doing these people a great disservice. Everyone who's emigrated to Canada came here, hopefully, people like you came here because they wanted to live in a country that was free and that was governed according to reason. And, we're just not living up to that right now.
I agree with you. And I'm starting to realize it now. The reason we came to Canada is because it's a Western country with Western values.
Yeah.
Leighton, I have one more question for you, and it's from my same journalist friend,
Mm-hmm.
and he was asking about something in the U.S. They've hired the Democrats have hired just a platoon of lawyers. They're calling it the Election Protection Program, I think.
Yes.
And then conversely, they've jailed or they've punished or regulated all of Trump's attorneys, and I think, as you mentioned to me, also his advisors.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think's going on there?
Well, I would say just by way of a picture is worth 1,000 words. Um, when Donald Trump was recently convicted on 34 counts that no one can understand, um, Joe Biden was asked in a moment of clarity. Actually, the drugs must have been working that day. A journalist called out, um, Joe Biden, what do you have to say about Donald Trump potentially going to jail? And there was just sort of this wry grin that Joe Biden gave. It was almost like an evil villain, gangster, villain. It was a, a kind of grin. And to me, that said it all. That's what the agenda is. I think the Democrats realize that they cannot win. If there's a free and fair election right now, I mean, Trump's numbers are ahead of what they were in 2016 when he won. In a free and fair election, there's no way that Biden can win. And so what they are doing is they're trying to change the election laws, and they are not only going after Trump and trying to put him in jail. They put to key people who are in his administration in jail. Navarro is in jail right now. He's serving a 4-month sentence, and Steve Bannon was just convicted of the offense of not honoring a congressional subpoena. It's interesting to note that many people throughout history have been convicted of that offense, but none of them have ever gone to jail. Bannon and Navarro are the first. Merrick Garland, who's currently the United States Attorney General, was just convicted of the same offense. I don't think there's any chance of him going to jail. And so, what we're seeing right now is, again, rule by law. The Democrats, like the liberals, they have power. They love having the power, and they don't think that they should have to relinquish it. Using the example of the United States that your friend referred to, the Democrats don't even understand their own constitution. They keep talking about the United States being a democracy. It's not. It's a republic. It's not a democracy. They have democratic elections, but fundamentally, they are a republic. And what I mean by republic is that they are a government, that they are a people governed by the people for the people. So it was never envisioned. The whole concept of the United States, of the American experiment, if we can call it that, was based upon the concept of limited government, because they were trying to escape the tyranny of a king, King George, and so that's the fundamental essence of what the American experience is. Of course, the Democrats have perverted that. They're trying to treat it as mob rule. This is even more evident in Canada, sadly, where we have a government that is not even democratically elected. Is they don't even have a majority, and they're sort of bubble gumming it together through this unholy coalition with the NDP, so that Mr. Singh is effectively our prime minister. He holds the balance of power, and you can see in his press conferences he just revels in it. Of course, I think this is a grave mistake that the Liberals have made. They've made a great miscalculation. If you look at the polls, the NDP have actually risen above the Liberals. I think they've, the straw man that they tried to construct in Mr. Singh, I think they've created a monster. I think Mr. Singh has designs that he's going to be the prime minister. I think the Liberals are only helping him to achieve that. But my point is that, these people who are in government right now, they are not governing according to law. They're governing according to power, the exercise of power. And I wrote a paper for my on my website, and it's one of my commentaries, which talks about rule of law versus rule by law, and it traces and it compares Justin Trudeau to evil King John back in jolly old England, who led to the Magna Carta. And this was exactly the situation that existed back in the early part of the 13th century is happening in Canada right now, where we have somebody really who is unfit for leadership, has immense power, and there simply never is enough, and there's no accountability. This is opposite to what our system is designed to achieve, going all the way back to the Magna Carta, which set the rule of law. It said that Parliament is supreme, and that these governments are answerable to us through the concept of representative democracy. And that's going back to your question about COVID. That tipped the scales in favor of governments and this overweening, overzealous exercise of power, and it's coming to a halt. We're seeing the beginnings of it in Europe, and I pray that it's going to come to Canada and the United States as well.
Just a quick follow-up question, Leighton. These 11 MPs that have been implicated in foreign interference, there's something in Parliament called parliamentary privilege, where apparently parliamentarians can release those names, but the federal government is contesting that. Is this a case of lawfare where the ones that want to release these names are looking down south? They're like, I don't want to end up dragged through the courts, and that's why they're afraid to speak out?
Yeah, so this is a great question about legislative privilege. And of course, those in government are always trying to expand this concept. I view this concept of privilege as a very limited thing. And in fact, it should be challenged. And if the government of Canada were taken to court, and if the court properly interpreted the limitations of the privilege that's being claimed, I suspect that they would have to release those names. That's not being done, I think, because it would be time consuming. But I can give you an example of where this occurred in the Ingram case that we prosecuted in Alberta. When we tried to ask Dr. Dina Hinshaw about her conversations with government about how the lockdown orders were fashioned during COVID, the Alberta government lawyers, they claimed this same privilege, that wandered into this area of exclusive authority of the executive branch. The judge there ruled that concept was not as broad as the Alberta government wanted to make it, and that there was a public interest in knowing what those discussions were. And ultimately, they had to reveal the substance of those conversations, and that led to all of the lockdown orders in Alberta being declared illegal, and ultra-vires the authority of the Chief Medical Officer of Health. And so you can see how important this information is. And I don't think that the claim of privilege is legally justified. I don't think it would withstand judicial scrutiny. And more than that, I don't think it's going to survive. I think it will bring down the Liberal government if they continue to try to maintain this. I saw a recent interview that you might have seen. It wasn't an interview. It was a typical Justin Trudeau softball interview where they had scripted questions where he's fed these questions. But the last question actually convicted his government, where he basically said, yes, we know there's foreign interference, but we've taken care of it. The Canadian public is not at all satisfied by that. And if he tries to maintain that stance, I think it'll only do harm to the popularity of the Liberal government. I think the Liberal government has two hopes. This is just my 10-cent opinion. I think they're hoping that the election of Donald Trump, his restoration to the White House, will help the Liberals' popularity, because many people in Canada don't like Donald Trump. And they also think that if they jettison their leader, that will give them enough of a boost to get over the hump and get another minority government that will be propped up by the NDP and the Greens. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the Liberals have made a fatal mistake. They should have jettisoned Justin Trudeau a year ago. I think he's a year past his best before date. And I think the longer that he's the leader of the Liberal Party, the more that the CPC and the star of Pierre Poilievre will rise.
Leighton, we're at the end of the show. You're a popular guy. Everyone knows who you are, but where can they follow you? Where can they watch your show?
Well, thanks for asking. Of course, the show is called Grey Matter. It's on a platform called Return to Reason, which is broadcast by Miracle Channel. The best way to follow the show is probably on our X page. That's at Grey Matter Convo. If it's of interest, we actually have a live stream show on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock Mountain. If people are interested, they can come and join, and they can attack me with questions and things like that. So that's enjoyable. We have a couple of really interesting shows out right now. My interview with Naomi Wolf was just released. It was a very fascinating discussion about her books, as she's a best-selling author. And I'm going to be having James Lindsay at my house later this week. Conceptual James, he's coming on a speaking tour to Alberta, so I'll be talking with him. And also this Friday, I'll have the pleasure of talking to Charlie Kirk about his new book. So hopefully people will take in that interview when it comes out. But it's been my pleasure being on with you on your show, Payman, and God bless you and all the work that you're doing. Thanks very much for having me on your show today.
Mr. Gray, thank you very much for coming on, and especially for simplifying all these complex issues for us.
Well, I have to do homage to to Thomas Aquinas and people like him who gave us, they not only they didn't give us the law, God did that, but they translated the law into simple terms, to lay terms, as it were. And those of us who are lawyers, that really is our job. Unfortunately, many of us have lost sight of that, and that's something that I'm very committed to changing.
Thanks again, sir. Have a nice day.
Thank you.